All right. Hi, I am here today with Tabitha, and I'm gonna do a little bit of an interview, a little bit something different for my channel today, and talk a little bit about this anthology that we have coming out this month, and then also a little bit about our novel prep processes and how we get ready to write either for National Novel Writing Month or any time that we're gonna sit down and write a novel. So, Tabitha, hi. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, it's nice to meet you, and I'm glad to be here. And my name's Tabitha. I go under the pen name T.M. Kohl, and I'm a writer of fantasy novels. Right now, I have a series that I'm working on called The Warriors of Brea. And that's been my sole project so far. I wish I had more under my belt, but that's for the future.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I got a chance to look at some of the books that you have posted, and they look fascinating. So it's
Thank
really
you.
cool. Yeah. And I might ask you some more about that in a little bit.
Okay.
What do you think you're like? What kind of you said fantasy novels, but like, what would you compare them to in terms of like to give folks an idea of sort of what are they young adult? Are they that kind of stuff?
Right. Yeah, comparative titles to me is always like the bane of my existence
Yeah.
because it's so hard to find and my mind just goes blank on out of all the millions of stories out there. But I do think my stories are similar, perhaps in feel to things like if you've ever watched Avatar: The Last Airbender when you were younger, or if you read the Chronicles of Narnia, um, having to do with basically another world where there's like epic fantasy, there's great powers of like good and evil, and elemental sort of magic, like people can control things like water or fire or earth. And but my stories tend to be more in the new adult age range. They're not young adult like those two stories.
Sure.
They deal more with like college age or older characters, and they're more meant for older teenagers and up probably.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about the same. I'm about in the same age targeting with my modern fae novels.
Hmm.
This new series that I'm working on right now is more epic fantasy, but young adult as opposed to the more like college age and up adult
Right.
or at least higher teen level of
Right. Yeah.
reader. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So we have got this Midwinter Magic and Mayhem anthology.
Yeah.
That's really exciting, and it's out on the 15th of October, which is right now as we're recording tomorrow.
Yes. Yes. Super
Um,
exciting.
yeah. So how did you pick what story you wanted to write for the anthology?
When we first started talking about this and kind of wanted to focus on like a winter theme with involving fantasy, my mind immediately went to one of my characters' like background in my series, and I really wanted to explore some like kind of like they were like it was kind of like a small idea that I had that I wanted to get to at some point, and I was like, this would fit perfectly, I thought. Where this character is one of the main characters of my series, and in his childhood he would go out hunting with his father and brother often, including in the winter. And I thought, excuse me, I thought it'd be cool to introduce like some of the more mysterious elements that lead to later events in his life,
Cool.
and also like explore a little bit of just his mindset and his interactions with his father and brother as they're also prominent characters in the series.
Yeah, I was really taken with how atmospheric the writing is and the story is. Definitely
Yeah.
feels it's got lots of winter vibes, a little bit of creepy aspect in there too. It
Yes.
was really well done. And but the
Thank you.
ending left that kind of opening like, oh, I bet you there's more here. So it's good to hear that
Right.
it's part of a series. So if anyone's
Yeah.
reading the anthology, you can go and pick up the rest of the series to find out more.
Exactly. Yeah. I was kind of like, and it can tie in. Yeah. And you don't have to know what happens in the series in order to read this short story. It can be
Yeah,
read beforehand. And if you're interested, then you're more than welcome to go and check out my books.
that's awesome. Was your writing process for that story like similar to the way that you write novels, or was it a little bit different for you because it was kind of a shorter piece?
I'd say it was pretty similar, just scaled down. I didn't have to do quite as much plotting. Like I kind of had like I only had to think of a few beats of the story as opposed to, like many.
Yeah.
And then sitting down and writing it, I felt generally went a little faster than my normal writing process, just because it was easier to connect those beats I had in mind once I decided how those would go down. Um, so I would say, yeah, just kind of scaled down version of my normal writing process, which made it feel pretty smooth, thankfully.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely I did something similar with my story as
Mhm.
a a side character. It's the antagonist for my series. And so
Oh,
I did a like a villain origin story. It was kind of where I was
hmm,
going with it. And so it's like it's nice when you kind of already have the characters in mind,
yes.
know a little bit about them already, and you're really just kind of fleshing out the ideas, the backstory that you've already been working with for other pieces of the series.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was nice to kind of start with familiar characters, but just maybe like rewind time a little bit of
Yeah.
where were they at this place in their life, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. So what are you working on now?
Right now, as in literally today, I'm working on finalizing my fourth book in the series. And I'm just like finalizing some revisions and making sure everything can get um, put into like the right templates so that I can get the paperbacks and hardcovers all ready to go and ready to print. And it's been a bit of a rush. I haven't been great with time management, unfortunately, this go around, but I'm really glad that I've like reached this point finally, and I'm excited to have the fourth book come out
And when does the fourth book come out?
next week.
Ah!
Yeah. It's been a
Wow, you
very
are
tight
cutting it
turnaround.
close, aren't
It's
you?
very, yes, it's being cut very close, and I'm really hoping that I don't know if the hardcover will be ready exactly on time, but because I know they take longer to uh like print the proofs and everything with Amazon. But I really wanted to stick to this date. I'm kind of like a bit on a schedule because I'm pregnant, so my baby's coming very soon, and I was like, I have to get this done before
Yeah.
the baby gets here. Um, so yeah, very tight turnaround, and but I think I'm at a really good place where I'm really happy with how things are right now.
And you said I think there's 5 books in the series.
There'll be 5 books in the series. That's right.
Yeah, and so then will you start working on the fifth one after your baby's born, or are you gonna start right away?
I've tried, yes, I've gotten a couple chapters written now, and I definitely want to, as much as I can get done now, it'd be ideal if I can get a good chunk of it at least drafted. And
Yeah.
then I'll definitely have to take some time after the baby's born to, adjust to being a mom and
Yeah, it's a big
figuring
adjustment.
out exactly like figuring out how to balance, taking care of the baby. And if I have time for writing once maybe I get a little more sleep.
Yeah.
So it may be a while before I can jump back into it, but my hope is that by the end of next year I can have the fifth book out and complete the series.
So you already have done your like prep process and everything for the book for book 5 and already know kind of you have an outline and all that, or do you outline? I guess
Yeah,
let's start there. How
sure.
what does your process look like?
Yeah, and I do have a rough outline, and I tend to be pretty like there's definitely beats I want to hit, like very clear images and scenes that I'm like, this is really important to hit for the story. Um, with the understanding that as I'm writing, I tend to like new ideas come or things
Yeah.
kind of morph into something else. So I guess I'm what people call a plantser, where
Yeah.
I do some plotting and I try to stick to the major beats as much as possible, but sometimes a new idea comes up and I just kind of run with it.
Yeah.
Um, yes, I do have my plotting and like my planning is all ready to go. It's just a matter of writing the story and connecting those beats I want to hit, and then like seeing what new ideas might come, because I know it will happen. It's just a matter of working with them as they come.
Cool.
Yeah.
Did you know at the start of the series like where you wanted to end it, or at what point did you kind of have an idea of how you wanted that last book to go?
I had a general idea, like I knew some like big ideas of what how it would end, like, will the good guys win? Will the bad guys win? Like that question was settled at least. And then also like um yeah, just like where characters generally end up by the end of the story. But it wasn't really till the third book that I had a much clearer idea, I think, once I kind of hit a big point in the storyline that made things seem more clear, like once I hit it, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
uh it kind of helped me understand, like, oh, okay, so this is going to cause like a big ripple effect, and that'll help the characters get to the endpoint I'm imagining. So yeah, like I started out with a very general idea, and now it's much more defined, thankfully, based on like how I've written the books up to this point.
Great. Yeah, I know that I struggled a lot with that book five, like just because you really it's that pressure to like feel like you have to stick the landing, you've written this whole
Yes.
series and there's all these threads to wrap up and you're just
Yes.
really trying to get them all tied up by that last book. So
Right. Yeah, the pressure is high, and I guess you've written a 5-book series,
I
so
did.
that's amazing. And I guess I'm wondering if you have any advice for that fifth
Ah!
book.
Oh man. Plan that it's going to take like twice as long as you actually think it's going
Okay,
to. I mean,
fair
maybe not.
enough.
Who knows? I mean,
Right.
for me, I think it was just I had a pretty vague sense of how I wanted to, like you said, right? Like the good guys or the bad guys, who's going to win in the end, right? How you
Hmm.
want the characters to end up in the end. And my series, each book focuses on there's a overarching plot arc, but each book kind of focuses on a different pair of characters.
Okay.
And yeah, so had to do the kind of the romance arc for those two characters in book five, and also tie that in with like how the overarching plot arc was going. So
Sure.
it was a lot of it.
Yeah, that sounds like it. And
Yeah.
I think that's pretty fair, that just expect it'll take longer, because now you have to go back and make sure, okay, is this thread is met its, it's met its arc, and
Yeah.
all the different threads, and making sure it's consistent with book one, what you started in book one. So,
But
yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
it was definitely really fun to have. There were like moments where I'm writing and then something would come up and I'd realize, oh, this is going to be a really cool callback to like book two or book one,
Yeah.
or and I hadn't necessarily planned those out in advance. It was more of a, as I'm writing, I
Hmm.
need something to happen here, and then I'm, brainstorming and realizing, oh, hey, I could do this, and that would be a cool callback to, the earlier books in the series. So
Right.
it's
Right.
nice to like bring characters back for the cameos, ones that had started in the earlier
Yes.
part of the series. So yeah, but
Absolutely.
super
Absolutely.
fun.
Hmm.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you had some scenes and everything that were like very clear in your mind. I
Hmm.
think of those as kind of like milestone plot points or something, because I'm
Hmm.
similar to you in that I have these kind of points that I'm working towards, but don't always know exactly what happens in between. How
Sure.
much do you usually feel like you need to have? Like, when do you know that like, okay,
Mm.
I'm done messing around with this. I'm just gonna start writing.
Right. Great question. I think when I try to use for each book, um, like roughly adhere to the 3-act structure. So I think like if I think about it analytically, if I like take, what kind of happens generally in each act, and am able to map the scenes I'm thinking of to different parts of that, each act and the overall arc of the story. Um, Once I feel like I've fleshed out all those elements sufficiently, like I guess if I have at least like maybe 3 beats to each act, and be able to like be like, okay, so we start out with our inciting incident, we have kind of like a turning point or like a major plot point to transition to act two, and then there's like a midpoint sort of thing that might change everything or make things more complicated, and then at the end of act two, like things are looking bad, but we're gonna keep working at it. And
Yeah.
then obviously like the climax of the story, like what that'll roughly look like, and then how things will wrap up. I'm like, once I feel like those are all met, or like I'm able to map out what I'm thinking to all those points, that's generally when I'm like, okay, I think I can start writing something down, like the rough draft of what I'm thinking. And then if there's like missing points or like things that I think need to be connected a little better, then try to go back and like flesh those parts out a little better.
Do you do most of this in like a Word doc, or do you use some sort of software that for writing? Like, are you a Scrivener person?
But before I would just, yeah, I would like write it down like in a doc, or maybe in my notebook. I have some notebooks that I use to like jot down my ideas real quick when I'm not close to a computer.
Yeah.
But this time I ended up using some visual mapping software called MindMup. Um, and it's free, which was really nice. And it was really helpful for me, just being a very visual person, to have like um, different ways I could map out the points I wanted to flesh out and connect. And so unfortunately, I'm not a Scrivener person, but I'd love to try it. At this point with this book, I really wanted to have a visual guide for what I was planning, because yeah, this was like the final book. I'm like, I really need to make sure this all matches up well and like ties up loose ends, and or sets up maybe sequel bait, sort of things like
Right.
that.
Yeah, I had one of those too. Yeah. My epilogue
Yeah.
is definitely a sequel bait.
Yes,
Like,
of course. I mean,
spin-off basically more than anything else.
sure, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what ended up happening this time, which was a little bit different than my process for the previous 4 books.
Yeah, I do like writing in Scrivener, but I've never been able to make it work for outlining,
Mm,
for some reason. And it seems weird because people keep saying like, oh, well, you can just move the little note cards around and so on and so forth. And I'm like, yeah, but that's just not how I think about plotting. I
sure.
don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think similar to what you're saying, I am thinking about structure as I'm doing my plotting and mapping kind
Hmm.
of like my ideas to that structure,
Hmm.
almost like a framework, and you're kind of like
Yeah.
hanging these scene ideas off of the framework. And
Right.
there's just no place to put that framework in Scrivener. So I'm usually
Okay.
doing it somewhere outside, either in a notebook or on a Word doc or
Hmm.
Google Docs or something like that. So
Hmm.
yeah. Yeah.
Right.
You also though, I noticed in your bio, you also do a lot of world building around your worlds, including
Yeah.
language and
Yes.
also like cultures and things. How much of that do you do ahead of time? How much of that is evolved through the source of through just the process of writing the books?
I definitely did a lot before even starting the first book. Like that's kind of what got me into writing in the first place, was just um thinking about new cultures, new worlds. Like I was a very imaginative child growing up, and so I'd like have all these drawings and these ideas of like, wouldn't it be cool if like you could go to this other world, and it's just like completely new, and they spoke a totally new language, and you had to figure out what they were saying. Um, so I, over quite a long time, like probably like middle school is when the ideas were like first starting to form, and like kind of my edgy, like, oh my gosh, I'm so deep and stuff, like sketches and ideas were being written down, but then they evolved into more concrete ideas or like fleshed out things. And in college I ended up studying anthropology, which was a really really cool subject to kind of like augment what I wanted to
Yeah.
do with the world building, and provide inspiration for like what are some different like systems or ways that people around the world think about like life, or just like, anything, and how can I apply that to the worlds I'm imagining, or like the cultures I am imagining. And then also taking a class on linguistics was also helpful, just because it kind of gave a framework of like, here's some basic things that all languages might have, or like ways to think about how to approach a language. And so I had a lot of the rough, like the like baseline or like foundational world building and language built, like probably in that time period, like before I started writing the book. And then so I had it once I started writing, and then it became a little more situational, like, okay, they're at a meal. What does it look like to eat a meal in Brea? And like, what are since I already had like some like maybe values in mind, or like how their society is structured in mind, like that would help in like shape what this particular scene might look like as a with a meal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
I
I guess that's ended up being my process sort of for that.
yeah, I in your story for the anthology, you mentioned some of the gods that I'm assuming are in Brea.
Yeah.
And um and I found that really fascinating because I'm also the story I'm working on right now has has a series of gods and
Hmm.
some like mythology that I've built up. How did you structure that like pantheon of gods and sort of come up with some of those ideas?
Yeah, a lot of it came just from my interest in our own world mythologies, and uh kind of like taking like, when you see something that like sounds kind of like unique, or like just an interesting or thought-provoking concept in perhaps like a ancient mythology system, like say like Norse mythology, or Hindu mythology or something, and being like, this is really interesting, and I think it could play a part in or like it can be adapted or perhaps into what I'm thinking might work, like how people in my world would think. And so I ended up kind of like being influenced by many different things. Like as with my anthropology studies, we would run into a lot of different belief systems, and or mythological systems. And so there, you'd find like there'd be like an obscure god that might be in one particular pantheon, and be like, wow, that is really interesting. And I wonder how what it would look like if that were that same kind of maybe concept, or like this god is a god of maybe this had a god had an interesting myth behind him, or her, or it,
Yeah.
whatever might be happening there. But kind of taking that inspiration, and working it in like threads of it into my own uh creation.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I'm having some fun with that. That definitely is
Mm-hmm.
like interesting. You see a lot of fantasy worlds, I think. A lot of the popular fantasy worlds end up having, Game of Thrones has a mythology system with multiple gods, and
Right.
I think that um, some of the other popular ones do as well. And so it's interesting to see how other authors have thought about like, well,
Yeah.
what do these gods do, and how do people like who believes and how do they believe, and what's the belief
Mm-hmm.
structure look like around that?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
and not all of those authors I don't think have anthropology backgrounds. So it's,
Right.
it's kind of fascinating to see what people have come up with.
Yeah, and I think like even if I hadn't been studying anthropology, it is amazing. Like there's lots and lots of free books out there, like on Amazon and all that stuff, that just detail myths from different cultures, and some of them are really interesting. Like I think I have, I don't know, when I first got my Kindle, I was like, oh wow, I'm gonna get this like Irish folk tales, uh, Ainu folk tales, folk tales from West Africa, and just kind of like peruse and see what is there, and have found some interesting ideas, or like yeah, definitely. Or even kind of taking idea and be like, what if I turned it on its head or something, trying to,
Sure. Yeah.
bend things around and seeing what happens if it's different from what the story I just read is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm kind of almost going in the opposite direction in that like I'm trying really hard to like not look too closely at what other like what real world mythology is, and
Sure.
just trying to use my imagination on things. And inevitably your imagination is always a product of the media and the, you
Yeah.
know, like culture that you have consumed, and so it's not perfect in any way whatsoever. So there'll probably be uh, um some process that I'm going to use at some point in time to kind of make sure that I'm not going too far in any weird
Right.
directions.
Right. Yeah, and like I think that's really cool too when you try to like think as far away from the, the box as possible and be like, what is something new that might, what gaps are there in maybe the mythologies we're used to hearing? Like, as Westerners, we hear a lot of like Greek mythology or maybe some Norse mythology. So like what could be different? Like what can be explored that's not kind of reliant upon those?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so back to, I guess, writing process stuff. I mean, that's still part of the writing process, obviously, but how do you keep track of all of this world building? Do you have that in some sort of like a wiki, or are you putting that like are you keeping it in a doc somewhere?
Google Docs has been very helpful for me in
Yeah.
that, because it started out like, when I was more of like a teenager or getting into college, and Google Docs didn't really exist, or like some of this software, like there's some amazing world building organizing software out there, and it didn't really exist back then. So I had a lot of like disparate documents just scattered like over different computers and different like my physical media, like my journals or something.
Yeah.
So Google Docs was a really helpful way for me to kind of group everything together and organize it by like maybe by culture or language or um
Yeah.
get things so like I can easily find what I'm looking for once I've collected all of the um different things that I had written down at some point.
Yeah, I'm actually landing in a similar place with Google Docs for
Hmm.
now, and then we'll see if I want to morph that into something else later. But for now,
Yeah,
it's kind of it's easy and I can access it from anywhere. So if I have an idea, I can just drop it in there, like on my phone or whatever. It's just
exactly.
real easy.
Yes, I think that's what it really appeals to me too, is that I can like whether it's my iPad or my phone or my computer or whatever, or even someone else's computer, I
Yeah,
can just
yeah.
get it really easily, which is nice.
Um, what so how does the prep work for writing a novel compare to other parts of the writing process? Like, what is your favorite part of the writing process?
Right. I do when I'm like fully motivated and I have like an abundance of ideas to work with, I love drafting. I love like if I can park myself in a coffee shop and enjoy some like tea or coffee and just right away
Yeah,
listening to my music. I got like my playlist ready to go and all that stuff. It's such a magical feeling to me to kind of see my stories take shape and like go from just existing in my head to existing like on a document and being able to go back and read it later and be like, wow, it's actually like I'm kind of liking this. Like I didn't
yeah.
write total crap.
It's always a crazy feeling of like, oh my
Yeah.
God, this is so bad. And then going back and looking at it later and be like, wait,
Yeah.
it's not that
Yeah,
terrible.
exactly. Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's like it's okay. This is pretty good. But that being said, there are definitely times when I'm not motivated or it just feels like pulling teeth, like finding ideas to flesh a scene out, and I'm just like, ugh, this is the worst.
Yeah,
So I do think my favorite part would have to be drafting for overall, but with the caveat of like when I've got something in my brain, it's just so fun and fulfilling. But when I'm really struggling, it's like really a struggle.
so what do you do to keep yourself motivated during that slog of a
Mm.
writing process, the drafting process?
Right. And that's the eternal question, isn't it? um,
I find I constantly have to come up with new things because like something that worked before, then it just stops working and I have to think
sure.
of something else.
Yeah, exactly. Like I often will have to like kind of find a new strategy. Like sometimes it does help me just to be like, you know what? We're just going to set a timer for 15 minutes. You're going to write what you can. And if it's one sentence, great. If it's paragraphs, amazing. Because sometimes if I just like sit down and I'm like, this is my focus time, my brain is like, okay, well, let's like generate some ideas. That doesn't always work though. So sometimes what's more most consistently helped me, I think, has been just taking a walk or like doing something else and letting my mind wander. And eventually, like it's kind of surprising how an idea can just come from what seems like nowhere when you're just maybe outside, or like if I'm, I don't know, listening to music and maybe like sketching a drawing or something like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing what can come to mind of like, oh, you know what, that's something I can work with. um, and then something else that also kind of helps me is I'm definitely like a verbal processor. So if I can
Oh,
talk with somebody,
yeah.
like my husband's like my number one soundboard for things, and
That's
being
good.
like, yeah, and if I tell him like, hey, this is what I've got so far. This is what I want to get to. I'm just having a really hard time making A and B meet. And sometimes like just even if I don't agree with his ideas, or like even if he's kind of like um stuck a little bit too, sometimes just talking it out can help bring about something like, oh yeah. And sometimes my husband has had a brilliant idea of like that would work like really well, and I really want to incorporate that somehow. So um whether even if the person I'm soundboarding off of doesn't necessarily have a solution, sometimes just that act of talking
Yeah.
has been a good way to maybe like get the rusty gears going or something.
Yeah,
It's like
sometimes
get the
somebody will
kink
say
out of the
something.
gears.
Sometimes somebody will say something and you're like, "No, that's not right." But then that's
Yeah.
even that is helpful because you realize
Yes.
it shuts down one avenue and you're like, "That's not
Right.
right because blah blah blah." And then you're like, "Oh, wait, but that means that this might be the right direction to go."
Right,
So,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and
yeah.
like kind of able to focus my energy more toward brainstorming with that particular path or something. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So we are kind of running out of time. Um, well, let's kind of wrap up a little bit.
Mhm.
What are you currently reading right now? I mean, besides the anthology,
Of course.
what what else are you reading right now that are, have read recently that you want to tell everybody about or recommend?
Currently right now I'm reading um one of an author I've met on Twitter who named AJ Calvin. She has a series called The Relics of War, and I'm reading the first book of that, where it's called The Moon's Eye. And it's sort of a, I would call it epic fantasy, and it reminds me a bit of like traditional tabletop role playing games. It
Huh.
has some of those tropes that really bring me into that sort of mindset. Where it's like they're like going to dungeons, they're fighting, monsters, and there's an evil like sorceress type person, and so lots of cool things that uh bring me back to like some of the classic yeah, like tropes and ideas that make fantasy really great. That's what I'm reading right now, and I'm really excited to continue getting through it.
Yeah, cool. I'll have to pick that up or at least have a look at it. I haven't heard of
Hmm.
that author or that series, so that's kind of cool.
Hmm.
Um, and where can folks kind of find you on the internet?
Yeah. So my website is tmkohl.com, and Kohl is spelled Kohl. Kind of like a unusual spelling of it. But there it has, all my social media links to my books, and some descriptions of my books, as well as some like blog posts of what I've been up to, as well as a series on creating your own language.
Oh,
Just
cool.
kind of things that have helped me, and I think that's been by far the most popular thing that brings people to my website. So if that's something that interests you, please check it out, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. And I think I've got a couple other extra things on there, but really my website is kind of where everything's happening, and you'll be able to find a link to basically anything you might be interested in.
That's a good resource. I'll make sure I put that in the notes for the
Well, thank
video
you.
as well. Yeah.
Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
So make it easy for folks. Yeah. Thanks for talking with me today. This has been really
Yes.
fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much
Um,
for having me. It was a pleasure.
yeah. Oh, also I should mention Tabitha has a YouTube channel as well, so you should definitely
Yeah.
go check that out. You'll find the link to it on her website, but I can also put that in the description to make it super easy for folks to go and check out her she's got some writing sprints over there and some other stuff. So yeah.
Hmm.